Everybody, my name is Cale Prindle. This is Words from the Muck, and today I'm here with Israel Carreon and Lynsey Mize, and we're going to be going through an AP prompt for the AP Language and Composition class. This is from 2014. It's question 2. There's a link in the description if you want to go check that out and follow along. So what we're going to be doing today is looking at a letter from Abigail Adams to her son, and we're going to be talking about the rhetoric that she's using. So one of you two want to start us off. If you wanted to summarize this, what are we looking at here?
Well, Abigail Adams is writing to her son John Quincy Adams after he's agreed to go, well, begrudgingly agreed to go with his father when he's working in Paris as the, what's the word I want? Ambassador. Yeah,
there we go.
He's the American ambassador to France. So she sends little John Quincy on his way to learn from Dad and learn his French and all other sorts of things. So
it's like the biggest send your kid to work day ever.
It's a years-long bring your kid to work day. Yeah.
All right, cool. Now you mentioned that it is begrudging. He doesn't want to go.
Right.
So that's kind of what we have in this thing, is her addressing how much he doesn't want to be there. So I want to talk, first of all, this was written in 1780. For a student who has to work with older writing, I'd say anything before 100 years old, maybe even...
It's tough.
It is tough. So what can students do when they have to work with writing like this? Any tips or tricks or anything else you can come up with?
And this is like reading outside the text, but getting some knowledge of the context of the time, and I'm not sure if we cover that in the English classes, but knowing about the time period and really does help really bring some context to exactly what she's speaking to, the time period, and why it's important, the address that she's making to her son, the responsibility, I think, which we'll go into later.
Sure.
That she lays on her son, attached to some kind of maternal cushion, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. But trying to get some historical context is certainly one thing to help. And yeah, what else?
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, I teach British literature, so we do a lot of Shakespeare. And the biggest complaint for decades with Shakespeare, for centuries, with Shakespeare has been his language and like kind of the inaccessibility of how his characters speak. Mm-hmm. And I think there's some of that in here. It's not quite Shakespeare, but the way her tone is very formal. And I think for a lot of students in the 21st century, imagining their mothers talking to them in this way is going to make it hard to relate to. But for me, going through piece by piece, I literally had to go through sentence by sentence and put it in my own words and what that actually meant. And being a mom myself, putting it in the tone that I would talk to my children helped too, because then it kind of humanizes her. So I think in an AP prompt, you're not going to have the time to paraphrase sentence by sentence, but you could at least go through and hit the main points and paraphrase those in your own words so that it like I said, it humanizes it. It makes it a little easier, to understand. And
we're English teachers.
Yeah.
We promise.
I know.
It's all good. But I absolutely agree. I mean, almost all of my notes on mine are they're just summaries. Like this paragraph, she's basically saying this, and that paragraph, she basically said that. Without doing that, it's very difficult to understand anything else that's going on. And so that's definitely, you have to take it piece by piece, see what you can grab. It is a challenge, and always the best thing to do to help you is read more than just your vampire romance fiction.
Absolutely.
That would help.
Yeah.
That would help.
Practice makes perfect.
All right, cool. Let's get into some of the rhetoric here. Lynsey, I know yours is all color-coded and fancy and really, really nice. And you've just kind of marked yours with ethos, pathos, and logos. If you want to take a sheet that's like one of those, either the ethos, pathos, logos, what are you finding? What do you think it means? And how can we write about those things?
Well, the one obviously that I see the most of, well, I wouldn't say the most, but the one that kind of struck me the most was Pathos. Yeah. So, which obviously she's his mom, so she's going to appeal to his emotions.
For sure.
So she does all kinds of things to appeal to his emotions. Like she has down at line 26, she says, "Nature has not been deficient." And in that way, you could read it several ways, but to me, it sounds a lot like flattery. Like you've got a good head on your shoulders. You're a smart kid. Don't waste your brain.
There you go.
So she's looking for him to live up to his potential. And then at the end, there's like what Israel alluded to a little bit there with the mom issues, the cushioning.
Yeah, well, it comes up several times in this whole letter. I mean, I think in lines 5 through, 9?
Yeah.
I think it can get a little bit heavy-handed, like in lines from I guess from 40 to 50. She brings out the whole responsibility of a civic leader, but then she ends it with a cushion and saying, of course, that I'm happy as your mother that you're doing your father and I are proud.
Yeah,
So
I'm proud of you.
I'm
anyway.
proud of you, yeah, no matter what.
Right.
So
Yeah, I mean, there's that pathos. I also think it's interesting, like when you're talking about like the civic responsibility and your duty and everything else. If I'm understanding the second to last paragraph correctly, it's this weird idea of like, also, your dad is one of these. Like, there's very much like this is part of the family thing you have to do. So I think that's interesting. I think there's a lot of kind of guilt tripping going in there.
Yeah.
Which I think totally fits with a pathos, trying to get in their head like you have to do that, and whether that's shame that she's trying to appeal to a little bit, it's a little hard to say.
Well, she says, like in line 45, she says like, you owe your existence to these people, basically. She's talking about, like, the people who fought in the Revolutionary War and his father who becomes a president, the second president of the United States, and all these people who have somehow dedicated their lives physically or emotionally to what he's living in now. She's like, look, you can't afford to just sit around and twiddle your thumbs. Like, you're the next generation.
For sure.
We're counting on you to carry it on.
Yeah, it's I didn't get shot at by British soldiers just so you could sit there and complain and live in our basement. So you've got to get up and do something.
Get off the couch, John Quincy.
There you go. Man, John Quincy, what a slacker. So, so if I was going to write about the pathos, so like if I had to sit down and be like, but what do I actually put on the page for something like that?
Well,
how would you approach that?
definitely, I think probably the strongest and the route to take for approaching this essay would be approaching the pathos point of view, and I'm not sure if it can be applied for logos, or maybe there can be something for ethos. But I think the strongest argument would be the sense of maternal voice with mixed with the sense of responsibility that that she placed to her son. Since we are a family of I guess of value from
like notoriety.
Notoriety from of this time period. It's our sense of responsibility to carry out the tenets of morality that the country was just basically founded. Like 5 years ago, 6 years ago? Yeah. So I think that's probably the strongest route. I would say even the easiest route to take when approaching this.
For sure.
This essay.
Yeah, because that's something we can all relate to, is having some kind of maternal or parental relationship.
Right. Yeah. So
and the guilt trip.
all the time. Yeah.
All the time. Still.
Yeah, it won't end.
Anyway. Yeah, so I think that in writing about pathos for something like this, I think something that helps us out is to find a list of emotions that you can work with. Like I said, I think there's a little bit of an appeal to shame. There is an appeal to love, and there's an appeal to responsibility, and I think that if you can write all of that down, Abigail Adams appeals to his shame by telling him, you've got these responsibilities, and it's effective because of saying, this is what your father has done, this is what you're going to do, and we're going to be proud of you. I think you can build a pretty effective argument with that.
Yeah, and if that's as far as like how you write about that, the one thing I always tell my AP students is take a few minutes after you've read through the prompt, make yourself an outline. Because if you don't know where you're going, you get rambly, it lacks all the things that a good organized essay should have. So for this, if you want to pick one appeal to latch onto, and pathos is the one that we've kind of latched onto here. So you've got your thesis statement. Abigail Adams uses the rhetorical device of pathos to appeal to her son, whatever.
Yeah,
that was poorly worded. But then you could do what you said, where you're outlining paragraph by paragraph in your essay based on the different emotions. So then you've got your bullet points lined out that way.
Cool. I like it. All right, we have a few more minutes. Let's talk about some of the other stuff that's going on. There's not a whole lot of what I would consider literary devices being used here, but there is at least one point where she brings in a metaphor to kind of help explain to him why this trip that he doesn't seem to want to be on, there's just one metaphor to help explain why it's good for him. And so she uses this, a river, the river metaphor. Hey, the rivers are like this. And so the basics of it is that if a river starts and it goes, it's picking up tributaries, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger as it collects more, it picks up more minerals, it becomes richer, it becomes more beneficial. Why does that work is the question that they will need to answer. It's like they use a metaphor, you can identify there's a metaphor, but why is the metaphor an effective use of her writing? Anything you guys have to throw on that?
Well, I have it, my logos, or sorry, my ethos is in green. And that one's highlighted in green because I feel like, first of all, she introduces it by saying, there's a writer I know. Like, she's using an expert opinion for this metaphor. So it's not like, I mean, women in this time period aren't seen as educated or experts in anything except for, you know, I don't know, butter churning and flag sewing. So it's like she has to use someone else's authority to kind of give her this voice. But, so there's some ethos there. And then it's just such a, like, you can't argue with it. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Rivers do that. And anyone would know that that's...
It's true. And I think it's something she continues later in the letter as well. Like, as you travel and you're doing things that you don't want to do, that's where you grow. That's what makes you a better person.
And I would even say, like, the end result is, even in a cosmic sense, that since this is the inception of this, you know, this country, that he will become one of the cogs of or a pillar that will be lasting for, you know, throughout history.
Sure.
And that will establish this country. So it's a grand responsibility that she places on her son. That not only does she place on her son, but as proxy, as example, she shows that, you know, you have responsibility, but since you are a civic leader, now you are example to everyone who is a part of this country. So I think it's even heavier onus that she places on her son. That, but I think this metaphor works here definitely. That I think in time, you know, it only goes in one direction forward. So in the river, it keeps continuing. So I think it fits into this context perfectly.
Yeah, and I think if you ever get kind of caught up in this specific metaphor like this, sometimes the logic of a metaphor is another thing you could play with. Excuse me. I know you played with the ethos before of referring to a writer. I think that there's a logic and a logos to the metaphor as well that is picked up later when she makes an allusion to Cicero. And that'll be kind of the last thing we talk about today. Because as she continues and gets over there, this idea of like, people don't become awesome when they have nothing to do. Instead, they become awesome if they've got a lot of challenges and hardship and things they've got to figure out. So you could use the metaphor as a part of that moment, as a part of the logos moment. Instead of just being like, I've got to deconstruct this metaphor, you could instead come at it and say, her appeal to logos includes a metaphor about a river that gets larger and is added to as it moves outside of its spring, and that it gathers more minerals and makes it more beneficial for people later on. And she continues that later with the allusion of Cicero. But here's my question for the allusion. I don't know a lot about Cicero. I read it. I know Mark Antony. I don't know much else about this person. So, but if I recognize, like, that's an allusion, how do we write about something where, like, I know that's there, but I don't know enough about it? Because you can't go research this in the middle of an essay.
No.
So, or in the middle of an exam. So any ideas, like, if you can recognize it, can you still do anything with it, or should you just leave it alone?
I think in this case, she gives you everything you need to recognize what point she's making, at least how she's using that to strengthen her argument. Like, because I mean, we can at least recognize the name Mark Antony. Hopefully, most AP students, but with Cicero, it's like, okay, so she's telling us what he did. Would he have shown so distinguished an orator if he'd not been roused, kindled, and inflamed by the tyranny of these people? So it shows us like, okay, so this must be a guy who had the opportunity to show his stuff through the lens of history, and Mark Antony's an enduring name, so Cicero must be someone also.
Okay.
But on the flip side too, if you did, like you mentioned, if you did recognize Cicero, I think if there's a temptation to kind of show off, especially for AP students. They like to show
But
off.
is this
You
the time
like
to
to
do
show
so?
off.
Yeah.
No, that's where I'm getting.
No?
That's what I'm
All
getting
right,
at.
well.
It's not. It's not the time to do. And you think it'll improve your,
Why
your
not?
score?
Why not?
Well, because that's not what the prompt is asking. The prompt wants to know about rhetorical strategies and not what you know about Greek or Roman history.
So in a case like this, the temptation to show like, ooh, Cicero,
Yes.
I know about him.
I'm very intelligent.
You might accidentally launch into a history lesson
Right.
Yeah.
instead of actually talking about why it's important that the name was brought up.
Right.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think the other thing you pointed out is like even as you were reading it, the word tyranny is really important. So you could do a little like, even if you didn't understand it, you know that you've got a guy, Cicero, who's being inspired to say something because of his circumstances. So even if that's all you knew, you might be able to kind of build a paragraph out of, Cicero is a name that a lot of people know. John Quincy Adams certainly would have known it. And especially in a moment of revolution, as you pointed out, the country's only 4 years old here. Somebody who stood up to something of a tyrant, that name's going to carry a lot of weight, which can build up some ethos within your illusion.
Right. Sub
Yeah.
King George III for Mark Antony, and you're suddenly.
And you're there. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I hope that was helpful. Israel, Lynsey, thank you so much for joining us on Words from the Muck. If you have any questions about writing, grammar, or anything else like that, leave it down in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.